As he begins to investigate the strange markings on the golden object his cow unearthed, local historians become stunned, and when he finally learns its true significance, he falls to his knees in disbelief. Farmer Michael Cooper had spent countless mornings watching his cattle graze across his rolling pastures in the misty hills of western Vermont. His family's dairy farm, nestled between ancient maple groves and weathered stone walls, had been operating since colonial times, but nothing in its 200-year history could have prepared him for what his favorite cow, Luna, would uncover on that foggy October morning. Luna had always been different from the other cows, more curious, always wandering off to explore. While the rest of the herd was content to graze in the lush meadows closer to the barn, Luna would often venture to the furthest corners of the property, as if searching for something only she could sense. Michael had grown fond of her peculiar nature, often joking with his wife Sarah that Luna was more like a detective than a dairy cow. That particular morning had started like any other. The autumn air was crisp, and a thick blanket of mist hugged the ground, giving the landscape an otherworldly appearance. Michael had risen before dawn, as farmers do, and was making his usual rounds when he noticed Luna's absence from the main herd. He found her at the edge of the old North Field, an area that had remained untouched for generations due to its rocky terrain and local legends about it being cursed ground. Luna was pawing persistently at the soil, her behavior more determined than usual. As Michael approached, he noticed something different about her demeanor. She seemed almost excited, continuing to dig with surprising precision. The morning sun was just beginning to pierce through the fog, creating strips of golden light that danced across the disturbed earth. That's when he saw it, a glint of something metallic beneath the surface. At first, Michael dismissed it as another piece of old farm equipment. The fields of Vermont were notorious for yielding centuries-old tools and machinery, remnants of the state's agricultural heritage. But as he bent down to examine it, his hands trembling from both the morning chill and growing anticipation, he realized this was something entirely different. Partially buried in the dark earth was what appeared to be a perfectly preserved golden disc, about the size of a dinner plate. Its surface was covered in intricate patterns unlike anything he'd ever seen before. Strange symbols curved around its edges, reminiscent of ancient writing systems he'd only seen in history books. At its center was an elaborate design that seemed to shimmer with an almost unnatural brilliance, even in the dim morning light. Michael stood frozen, his mind racing with questions. The object looked ancient, yet it showed no signs of decay or damage. The patterns seemed to shift and change as he moved it in the light, creating an illusion of movement that made his eyes strain to focus. He found himself unable to look away, as if the disc held some magnetic pull over his attention. Luna watched quietly from a few feet away, her usual restlessness replaced by an almost reverent stillness. The fog had begun to lift, revealing more of the disturbed ground around them. Michael noticed that the soil where the disc had been buried was different, darker and more densely packed than the surrounding earth, suggesting it had been deliberately placed there long ago. The weight of the disc in his hands felt significant, yet somehow lighter than its size would suggest. As he carefully brushed away the remaining soil, more details emerged. The symbols appeared to be arranged in concentric circles, each ring containing different patterns. Some resembled constellations, others looked like ancient calendars, and a few seemed to depict scenes from stories he couldn't begin to understand. A chill ran down Michael's spine as he realized the implications of what he was holding. This wasn't some discarded piece of farm equipment or a lost piece of jewelry. The craftsmanship was too precise, the materials too valuable, and the symbolism too deliberate for this to be anything but a significant historical artifact. But why was it here, buried in his family's field? How long had it been waiting beneath the surface for Luna to find it? The sound of distant church bells broke through his contemplation, reminding him of the morning's chores that still needed attention. But as he stood there, holding this mysterious object, Michael knew his life was about to change. He carefully wrapped the disc in his jacket and placed it in his truck's cab, all the while feeling as if he were being watched by unseen eyes from the surrounding woods. Luna followed him back to the barn, seemingly satisfied with her morning's work. As Michael began his daily routine, his mind kept drifting back to the golden disc and its mysterious origins. Little did he know that this discovery would not only unlock ancient secrets, but also set in motion a chain of events that would transform his struggling farm into something beyond his wildest dreams. The discovery of the mysterious disc couldn't have come at a more critical time for Michael Cooper. His dairy farm, once the pride of Washington County, had been struggling to stay afloat in an increasingly challenging agricultural landscape. The same rolling hills that had sustained his family for generations now seemed to mock him with their beauty, masking the harsh reality of his mounting financial troubles. That evening, after securing the golden disc in his study, Michael sat at his worn kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of overdue bills and bank notices. The harsh fluorescent light cast shadows across his weathered face as he ran his fingers through his graying hair. His wife, Sarah, placed a steaming cup of coffee in front of him, her hand lingering supportively on his shoulder. "How bad is it?" she asked, though they both knew the answer. Michael sighed heavily, pushing aside a final notice from the equipment company. "The new regulations are killing us, Sarah. They want us to upgrade all our milking equipment by next spring. That's nearly $200,000 we don't have. The bank's already made it clear they won't extend our credit further." He paused, the weight of their situation hanging heavy in the air. And now the Hendersons' farm just got bought out by that big agricultural corporation, Agritech. They're offering our suppliers better rates than we can ever match. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of their daughter Emma's footsteps on the creaking stairs. At 16, she was the sixth generation of Coopers to live on this land, and the thought of being the one to lose it all kept Michael awake at night. Emma had grown up learning every aspect of farm life, from helping with the morning milking to managing their small farm stand by the road. Her love for the land ran as deep as her father's, but lately Michael had noticed her growing awareness of their financial struggles. "Dad," Emma said, sitting down at the table, "Mrs. Bennett from the library told me today that they're looking for part-time help. I thought maybe I could work there after school, to help out with—" Her voice trailed off as she gestured at the pile of bills. Michael's heart clenched. "No, sweetheart. Your job is to focus on school. We'll figure this out." But even as he spoke the words, he wasn't sure he believed them anymore. The farm's problems had been building for years. The old barn needed significant repairs, with its roof showing dangerous signs of wear. The antiquated irrigation system was barely keeping up with their needs, and 3 of their best milk cows had fallen ill last winter, reducing their production capacity. The property taxes had increased again, and the cost of feed seemed to rise with every delivery. Michael stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the darkened fields where he'd made the morning's discovery. The moon cast an ethereal glow over the landscape, reminding him of how the strange disk had shimmered in the early light. He hadn't told Sarah or Emma about it yet, partly because he couldn't quite explain what he'd found, and partly because he feared getting their hopes up about its potential value. The local museum in Burlington had been struggling for years, and he doubted they could offer much, even if the disc proved historically significant. Selling it privately felt wrong somehow, as if doing so would betray the generations of Coopers who had worked this land. Yet the thought of its possible worth nagged at him as he stared at the mounting bills. His musings were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Tom Walsh, their closest neighbor and friend of 30 years. Tom's face was etched with concern as Michael invited him in. "Heard about Agritech moving in on the Henderson place," Tom said without preamble. "They've been buying up farms all across the state. Word is they're offering cash buyouts way above market value." Michael's jaw tightened. "We're not selling, Tom. This land has been in my family since before Vermont was even a state." Tom nodded, understanding the pride and stubbornness that came with working the same land for generations. "Just thought you should know they'll probably come knocking soon. They've got their eyes on this whole valley." After Tom left, Michael returned to his study, pulling out the wrapped disc from its hiding place in his grandfather's old desk. Under the warm lamplight, the symbols seemed even more mysterious than before. He traced them with his finger, feeling slight indentations that suggested they had been carved rather than cast into the metal. The disc's presence filled him with an odd mixture of hope and unease. Hope, because its discovery felt somehow meaningful, as if Luna had led him to it for a reason. Unease, because its perfect preservation and unusual markings defied logical explanation. His grandfather had often told stories about the land's history, tales of native settlements and colonial mysteries that had once made Michael's young imagination soar. Now, holding this enigmatic object, those stories took on new significance. What if there was more to this property than generations of Coopers had realized? A sudden gust of wind rattled the study's window, making Michael jump. Outside, clouds had rolled in, obscuring the moon and casting the farm into darkness. In the distance, he could hear Luna's distinctive moo, as if she too was thinking about their morning's discovery. Setting the disc aside, Michael pulled out his laptop, an old model that protested as he opened a browser. He began searching for information about ancient artifacts found in Vermont, about historical trading routes through the region, about native settlements in the area. Hours ticked by as he fell deeper into his research, barely noticing when Sarah came to tell him she was heading to bed. As midnight approached, his eyes grew heavy, but his mind was racing with possibilities. Tomorrow, he decided, he would need to start making some calls. Someone had to know what this disc was, what the symbols meant, why it was buried on his land. But as he finally headed upstairs to bed, one question kept nagging at him. Should he tell anyone about his discovery, or would doing so only bring more troubles to his already struggling farm? The morning after his late-night research session, Michael woke before dawn, with the decision weighing heavily on his mind. The golden disc, now carefully wrapped in his grandfather's old handkerchief, seemed to pulse with possibility from its aiding place in the study. As he went about his morning chores, each familiar task was accompanied by an internal debate that grew more intense with every passing hour. During the morning milking, Michael found himself studying Luna more carefully than usual. The cow that had made the discovery seemed uncommonly peaceful, chewing her hay contentedly as if she hadn't just turned his world upside down. Her large brown eyes followed him around the barn with what he could have sworn was knowing intelligence. "You knew it was there, didn't you, girl?" he murmured, patting her flank. Luna's only response was a gentle swish of her tail. By mid-morning, the autumn sun had burned away the fog, revealing a crystal-clear Vermont day. Michael sat in his truck, phone in hand, thumb hovering over the number for the state archaeological office he'd found during his late-night research. The consequences of his next action played out in his mind like competing movie scenes. If he reported the find, what would happen? The government might claim rights to his land for archaeological study. He'd heard stories of farmers losing access to their fields for months or even years, while experts conducted their research. With his financial situation already precarious, He couldn't afford any interruption to his farm's operations, but if he kept it secret and tried to sell it privately, he could be breaking the law. More than that, he could be destroying historical evidence that might be crucial to understanding the region's past. The weight of that responsibility felt almost as heavy as his financial burden. There was also the matter of the land itself. Since the discovery, Michael had found himself looking at his property with new eyes. Every hill and hollow seemed to hold potential secrets. What if the disc wasn't alone? What if his family's farm sat on top of something historically significant? The implications were both exciting and terrifying. His phone buzzed, startling him from his thoughts. It was a text from Agritech's representative following up on Tom's warning from the night before. "Mr. Cooper, we'd love to discuss the future of your property. Our offer would solve all your current financial concerns." Michael's jaw clenched as he deleted the message. The timing felt almost too convenient, adding another layer of complexity to his decision. If word got out about the artifact, would it make his land more valuable? Or would it tie it up in red tape and bureaucracy, making it worthless for any purpose? He got out of the truck and walked to the spot where Luna had made her discovery. The disturbed earth had already begun to settle, nature quickly erasing any evidence of the find. But as he stood there, something about the location nudged at his memory. His grandfather had often told stories about this particular field, claiming it had special significance to the native peoples who had lived here before the Coopers. "The land remembers," his grandfather used to say, "and sometimes it chooses when to share its secrets." Making up his mind, Michael walked back to his study and carefully unwrapped the disc. In the clear morning light, the symbols seemed even more distinct. He noticed something he hadn't seen before, a recurring pattern that looked almost like a map, with what could be rivers and mountains etched into the golden surface. His hands trembling slightly, he picked up his phone again, but this time he dialed a different number. Instead of the state authorities, he called Dr. Catherine Chen, a professor of archaeology at the University of Vermont, whom he'd found mentioned in several local news articles about historical discoveries in the region. After 3 rings, a crisp, professional voice answered. Michael took a deep breath and spoke. "Dr. Chen, my name is Michael Cooper. I run a dairy farm in Washington County, and, well, I think I've found something you might want to see. But before I tell you more, I need to know something. What rights do farmers have when historical artifacts are found on their land?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Dr. Chen spoke again, her voice carried both excitement and understanding. "Mr. Cooper, that's a very good question. Why don't you tell me what you found, and I promise to be completely transparent about your rights and options before we proceed with anything." For the next 20 minutes, Michael carefully described the disc and the circumstances of its discovery, while purposefully avoiding giving its exact location. Dr. Chen listened intently, asking occasional clarifying questions. Her excitement was palpable, but she maintained a professional demeanor. "Mr. Cooper," she said finally, "based on your description, this could be a significant find. The symbols you've described suggest possible pre-colonial origin, and the material, composition. Well, I'd need to see it to be sure, but I want to be clear. You have rights in this situation. Any artifacts found on private land belong to the landowner, though there are certain responsibilities that come with historically significant finds." Michael absorbed this information, feeling some of his tension ease. "And if I were to work with you on this, what would that look like?" "We could start small," she offered. "I could come out to your farm, examine the artifact, and provide my professional opinion. No official reports, no government involvement, just an initial consultation. You'd be in control of how we proceed after that." As Michael considered her proposal, Luna's distinctive moo carried across the fields. He smiled, thinking about how his curious cow had set all this in motion. Something about Dr. Chen's approach. It felt right, a way to explore the disc's significance while maintaining control over his land and its secrets. "All right," he said finally. "Can you come out tomorrow? But I have one condition. This stays between us for now. I can't risk my farm operations being disrupted until we know what we're dealing with." "Of course," Dr. Chen agreed. "I'll bring some basic equipment for preliminary examination. And Mr. Cooper, thank you for making the right choice. Too many historical artifacts disappear into private collections, their stories lost forever." After ending the call, Michael sat back in his chair, feeling as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He had chosen a middle path, neither ignoring his responsibility to history nor surrendering control of his farm's fate. Now he just had to hope he'd made the right decision. Looking out his study window at the ancient maples lining his driveway, their leaves turning gold in the autumn sun, Michael thought about all the generations of Coopers who had worked this land before him. Maybe this discovery was their legacy, not just the farm itself, but something deeper, something that had been waiting all these years to be found. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, Michael felt a glimmer of hope. He carefully rewrapped the disc and placed it back in its hiding place. Whatever secrets it held, he would face them head-on, just as his family had faced every other challenge this land had presented them over the centuries. The next morning dawned grey and misty, matching Michael's nervous energy as he prepared for Dr. Chen's visit. He'd spent a restless night alternating between excitement and anxiety, his dreams filled with swirling golden symbols and mysterious maps. Even his early morning chores felt different, charged with an anticipation that made every minute seem to crawl by. Sarah and Emma had taken the news of his discovery with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. Over breakfast, Emma peppered him with questions about the disc's appearance and symbols, while Sarah quietly expressed concern about involving outsiders in their business, given their precarious financial situation. "What if it's valuable?" Emma had asked, her eyes bright with possibility. "Maybe it's like those stories about farmers finding buried treasure. Or maybe it's nothing but an old piece of decorative metal," Sarah countered gently, ever the practical voice of reason. "Let's not get our hopes up before this professor takes a look at it." Michael understood both perspectives. As he waited for Dr. Chen's arrival, he found himself repeatedly checking the disc, studying its intricate patterns in the morning light. Each examination revealed new details, tiny variations in the symbols, subtle changes in the way the metal caught the light. He'd even started sketching some of the recurring patterns in an old notebook, trying to make sense of their arrangement. At precisely 10 o'clock, a modest sedan pulled up the gravel driveway. Dr. Catherine Chen emerged, looking more like a hiker than a professor in her practical outdoor clothing and sturdy boots. She carried a large equipment case and wore an expression of barely contained excitement. "Mr. Cooper," she greeted him warmly, shaking his hand. "Thank you for trusting me with this. I brought some basic equipment for preliminary analysis. Nothing invasive, I assure you." Michael led her to his study, where the disc lay waiting on his desk, wrapped in its protective cloth. As he carefully unveiled it, he watched Dr. Chen's face closely. Her sharp intake of breath and widening eyes told him more than words could have. This was no ordinary find. "May I?" she asked, pulling on a pair of white cotton gloves. At Michael's nod, she gently lifted the disc, her trained eyes scanning every detail. "The craftsmanship is extraordinary," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "The precision of these markings and the material composition appears consistent throughout." For the next several hours, Michael watched as Dr. Chen conducted her examination. She photographed every angle of the disc with a specialized camera, took detailed measurements, and made careful notes about each symbol pattern. She used various instruments from her case, a digital microscope, a UV light, and what she explained was a non-invasive material analyzer. "Mr. Cooper," she said finally, looking up from her work, "this artifact is unlike anything I've encountered. In my career, the symbols share characteristics with both Native American and pre-Columbian iconography, but their arrangement and execution suggest a level of sophistication we don't typically associate with pre-colonial New England." Michael leaned forward, his heart racing. "What exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying this piece shouldn't exist, at least not here, not from this time period, the metalwork alone." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Gold of this purity, worked with this level of precision, simply wasn't possible with the technology we believe existed in this region during pre-colonial times." Outside, a rumble of thunder punctuated her words, and rain began to patter against the study's windows. Luna's distinctive moo carried from the barn, drawing both their attention. "Tell me more about your cow's discovery," Dr. Chen requested, pulling out a fresh notebook. "The exact location and circumstances could be crucial." Michael described that foggy morning in detail, Luna's unusual behavior, the disturbed soil, the way the disk had seemed to emerge from the earth itself. As he spoke, Dr. Chen's expression grew more intrigued. "Would you be willing to show me the exact spot?" she asked, already reaching for her raincoat. "Even if the rain's washing away any remaining evidence, the location itself might tell us something." Despite the increasingly heavy rain, they made their way to the north field. Luna watched their approach from the barn's entrance, her large eyes following their movement. At the discovery site, Dr. Chen pulled out a small GPS device and took several readings. "Interesting," she muttered, making more notes. "We're at a significant elevation point relative to the surrounding landscape. In many ancient cultures, such locations were chosen specifically for astronomical observations or ceremonial purposes. As they stood in the rain, Dr. Chen began explaining her initial theories. The disk's symbols might represent star charts or seasonal markers. The recurring patterns could be a form of ancient writing system, or perhaps a map of the region as it existed centuries ago. Each possibility she mentioned opened up new questions, new avenues of investigation. "Mr. Cooper," she said finally, turning to face him, "with your permission, I'd like to pursue this research further. We can keep it unofficial for now, but I have colleagues, specialists in archaeoastronomy and ancient metallurgy, who might help us understand what we're dealing with here." Michael hesitated, rain dripping from his cap as he considered her request. "How many people are we talking about, and what would they need to know? Just 2 or 3 experts, all of whom I trust completely. We can share photographs and data without revealing the location or your identity. Think of it as a preliminary and consultation." Looking back toward his farmhouse, Michael thought about what this commitment might mean. He was already investing time and emotional energy into this discovery, and involving more people would deepen that investment. But something about the disk's mysteries called to him, demanding to be understood. "All right," he agreed finally, "but everything stays confidential for now. My family's livelihood depends on this farm. I can't risk anything disrupting our operations." Dr. Chen nodded solemnly. "You have my word. And Mr. Cooper, thank you for being willing to explore this. Too often important discoveries are either hidden away or exploited for quick profit. Your approach, careful, responsible, considered, is exactly what's needed. Here." As they walked back to the house, Michael felt a growing sense of purpose. Whatever the disk's secrets might be, he was now committed to uncovering them the right way. Each step forward might bring new challenges, but it also brought the possibility of understanding something extraordinary, something that had been waiting on his land for generations, perhaps centuries, for the right moment to be found. Weeks following Dr. Chen's initial visit transformed Michael's daily routine into a delicate balance between running his farm and pursuing the growing mysteries of the golden disc. Each morning began with the usual agricultural demands: milking the cows, maintaining equipment and managing his dwindling resources. But his evenings were now devoted to an entirely different kind of cultivation, the painstaking process of understanding the artifact's secrets. Dr. Chen had set up a secure digital workspace where she shared updates from her trusted colleagues. Every few days, new theories and analyses would appear, each more intriguing than the last. The metallurgist, Dr. James Harrison, had been particularly excited by the preliminary compositional data. "The gold content is remarkably pure," his report stated, "but it's the trace elements that are truly fascinating. The specific mixture suggests an origin that doesn't match any known historical mining source in North America. In fact, the closest comparable samples we've found are from ancient sites in South America, specifically Peru." This revelation had kept Michael awake for several nights. How had an artifact with South American characteristics ended up buried in his Vermont field? The implications were staggering, suggesting trade routes or connections between ancient civilizations that history books had never mentioned. Sarah had noticed the change in him. One evening, as he sat at the kitchen table surrounded by printouts of symbol analyses and historical maps, she placed a cup of coffee beside him and sat down. "You're different since finding that disc," she observed, her voice carrying a mix of concern and curiosity. "I haven't seen you this passionate about anything since we first took over the farm from your father." Michael looked up from a particularly puzzling set of symbols that Dr. Chen's archaeoastronomer colleague believed might represent celestial alignments. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" "I'm not sure yet," Sarah admitted, "but Emma's caught your enthusiasm. She's been checking out every book on ancient civilizations from the school library. Mrs. Patterson, the librarian, asked me if we were planning a family trip to South America." The mention of their daughter brought a smile to Michael's face. Emma had indeed thrown herself into the mystery with teenage determination. She'd started a detailed journal of their findings and had even begun learning about ancient writing systems in her spare time. Her latest theory was that some of the disc symbols resembled Incan quipus, the knotted cords used for record-keeping in ancient Peru. Luna, too, seemed changed by the discovery. The cow had developed a habit of returning to the discovery site each morning, standing there for long periods as if waiting for something. Other farmers might have dismissed it as normal bovine behavior, but Michael couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. One particularly clear night, unable to sleep, Michael found himself drawn to the north field. The full moon cast enough light to navigate by, and he carried the disc with him, wrapped in its protective cloth. As he approached the discovery site, he found Luna already there, her white coat almost luminescent in the moonlight. "You're not making this any less mysterious." "Old girl," he murmured, patting her neck as he passed. Standing at the exact spot where the disc had been found, Michael carefully unwrapped it. In the moonlight, the symbols seemed to shift and dance across its surface. He found himself tracing them with his finger, following the patterns that Dr. Chen's team had begun to identify as potential star maps. Suddenly, Luna let out a low, urgent moo. Michael looked up and froze. For a brief moment he could have sworn he saw lights moving in the woods at the field's edge. Not flashlights or headlamps, but something different, more like the shimmer of fireflies, but larger and more purposeful. He blinked, and they were gone. The next morning, he debated whether to mention the incident to Dr. Chen. The scientific part of his mind insisted it had been a trick of the moonlight, or perhaps his eyes playing tricks after too many late nights, studying ancient symbols. But another part of him, the part that had grown up listening to his grandfather's stories about the land's ancient mysteries, wondered if there might be more to it. Dr. Chen's latest email didn't make his decision any easier. Her archaeoastronomer colleague, Dr. Maria Suarez, had made an intriguing discovery about the disk's symbols. The arrangement of these particular markings, she wrote, appears to align with a very specific celestial event, a planetary conjunction. That occurs only once every 470 years. Based on our calculations, the next alignment is due to occur in less than 6 months. Michael found himself checking the calendar obsessively after that. The spring equinox, the date Dr. Suarez had identified as significant, seemed both too far away and too close. What would happen when the stars aligned with the disk's markings? The rational part of his mind insisted it was purely academic, a way to date the artifact's creation. But the strange lights in the woods and Luna's continuing odd behavior suggested something else might be at work. The waiting was made more challenging by the need for secrecy. Though Dr. Chen's team had made remarkable progress in understanding the disk's origins and potential significance, they all agreed that going public too soon could be disastrous. Not only would it attract unwanted attention to Michael's struggling farm, but it might also draw the wrong kind of interest before they fully understood what they were dealing with. This secrecy was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. The local farming community was small, and people had begun to notice changes in Michael's behavior. His reduced participation in community events and frequent visits from Dr. Chen's silver sedan had sparked speculation. Tom Walsh, ever the concerned neighbor, had started asking pointed questions about Michael's late-night visits to the North Field. "People are talking, Mike," Tom had said during one of his impromptu visits. "Some folks think you're in talks with Agritech. Others say you're prospecting for oil or minerals. Betty Johnson swears she saw strange lights up by your North Field last week." The mention of lights had made Michael's heart skip a beat, but he'd managed to keep his expression neutral. "You know how people love to gossip, Tom. I'm just trying some new farming techniques, seeing if I can turn things around." But even as he spoke the words, Michael knew the situation was becoming untenable. The disk's mysteries were consuming more and more of his time and energy, while the farm's financial problems continued to mount. Something would have to give soon. He just hoped he could uncover the truth before circumstances forced his hand. That evening, as he updated his growing notebook of observations and theories, Michael found himself drawing the same symbol over and over, a circular pattern from the disk's center that Dr. Suarez believed represented the upcoming celestial alignment. Outside his study window, Luna stood in her now familiar spot in the North Field, silhouetted against the setting sun, as if she too was waiting for something momentous to occur. The first real crisis struck on a bitter February morning, 3 months after the disk's discovery. Michael woke to find Luna lying on her side in the barn, her breathing labored and her usually bright eyes glazed with fever. The sight sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the winter cold. "Not you, girl," he whispered, kneeling beside her. "We can't lose you now." His hand trembled as he reached for his phone to call the veterinarian. Dr. Sarah Martinez arrived within the hour, her truck crunching over frozen ground. As she examined Luna, her expression grew increasingly puzzled. "I've never seen symptoms quite like these," she admitted, straightening up. "Her vital signs are all over the place, but I can't find any obvious cause. It's almost like her entire system is responding to some kind of environmental stress." The words hit Michael like a physical blow. Could this have something to do with the disk? Luna had been acting strangely ever since the discovery, spending hours at the site where she'd found it. Had she been exposed to something? The thought opened up a whole new realm of worries. But Luna's illness was just the beginning. That same afternoon, as Michael was helping Dr. Martinez administer treatment to Luna, A loud crash echoed from the old barn's upper level. A major support beam, weakened by years of harsh Vermont winters, had finally given way. The resulting damage made the entire structure unsafe. "You can't keep the animals in here," Dr. Martinez declared, looking up at the now precarious roof. One heavy snowfall, and the whole thing could come down. The timing couldn't have been worse. With temperatures regularly dropping below freezing, Michael needed the barn more than ever. The cost of emergency repairs would be astronomical. Money he simply didn't have. The recent weeks of dividing his attention between the farm and the disk's mysteries had already strained his resources to the breaking point. That evening, as he sat at his kitchen table surrounded by urgent bills and repair estimates, Michael received another blow. An email from Dr. Chen contained disturbing news. Unauthorized photos of the disk had somehow leaked online. Though the images were blurry and the location unidentified, they had caught the attention of several prominent archaeologists and, more worryingly, private collectors. "We need to move quickly," Dr. Chen wrote. "Once something like this goes public, it becomes increasingly difficult to protect. I'm already receiving inquiries from colleagues asking if I know anything about it. We may need to consider involving official channels sooner than we planned." Sarah found him still staring at the computer screen an hour later, his coffee long gone cold. "Michael, talk to me," she urged, sitting beside him. "What's really going on here?" He looked at his wife, seeing the worry lines that had deepened around her eyes over the past months. "Everything's falling apart," he admitted. "Luna's sick. The barn's failing, and now the disk. I thought I could handle it all, keep everything balanced, but you're just one person," Sarah finished softly, "and you're trying to carry too many secrets." The truth of her words hit home. He had been so focused on protecting the disk's mysteries that he'd lost sight of what was truly important: the farm that had sustained his family for generations, the animals that depended on him, the people he loved. The next morning brought yet another setback. The bank called to inform him that they were initiating foreclosure proceedings. His recent missed payments, combined with the property's declining commercial viability, had forced their hand. They were giving him 30 days to either bring the account current or face losing the farm. As Michael hung up the phone, his hands shaking, he heard vehicles pulling up his driveway. Through the window, he saw 3 black SUVs approaching, their tinted windows reflecting the winter sun. Men in suits emerged, led by a familiar face, the agritech representative who had been trying to buy his farm. "Mr. Cooper," the man called out as Michael stepped onto his porch, "I think it's time we had a serious conversation about your property's future. We know about your recent discovery. We're prepared to make you an offer that would solve all your current problems." Michael's blood ran cold. How did they know about the disk? And more importantly, what else did they know? The men's presence felt less like a business proposition and more like a threat. Inside the house, his phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Chen. "Urgent. Don't talk to anyone about the disk. Evidence suggesting it's part of something bigger. May be connected to similar findings across New England. We'll explain more in person. Coming to you now." But as Michael looked at the agritech representative standing in his driveway, he wondered if Dr. Chen would arrive too late. The walls were closing in from all sides. Luna's mysterious illness, the failing barn, the bank's deadline, and now these men who somehow knew about his discovery. In the barn, he could hear Luna's labored breathing. The proud cow who had started all this with her discovery now lay suffering from an inexplicable ailment. The irony wasn't lost on him. Everything had begun with Luna, and now she too was failing. As he stood there, caught between the corporate suits in his driveway and his dying barn, Michael felt the weight of every decision he'd made since finding the disk. Had his pursuit of its mysteries led him to neglect what truly mattered? Or was there something more at play here, something bigger than his family's farm and its financial troubles? The wind picked up, carrying a hint of approaching snow. In the distance, storm clouds gathered over the mountains, promising another harsh winter blast. Michael clutched the porch railing, his mind racing through his options, each one seeming worse than the last. Inside his study, the disc lay hidden in its secret compartment, its ancient symbols holding whatever secrets had brought him to this moment. Out in the barn, Luna's condition continued to deteriorate. And now, in his driveway, stood men who represented either salvation or destruction. He couldn't be sure which. The choice he would make in the next few minutes would determine not just his future, but the fate of his family's legacy, and perhaps something even more significant that he was only beginning to understand. Just as Michael felt the weight of his circumstances becoming unbearable, help arrived from an unexpected direction. The rumble of approaching trucks made everyone turn toward the farm's entrance. A convoy of vehicles was making its way up the drive, led by Tom Walsh's distinctive red pickup. The sight stopped the Agritech representatives in their tracks. One by one, vehicles pulled in behind Tom's truck. Tractors, farm trucks, and personal cars, all driven by familiar faces from the community. Michael watched in amazement as his neighbors, fellow farmers, and even townspeople he barely knew began emerging from their vehicles. "Sorry we're late, Mike," Tom called out, striding past the corporate suits as if they weren't even there. But once word got around about Luna and the barn, well, it took a little time to gather everyone. The Agritech representative stepped forward, his polished shoes already dusty from the farm's driveway. "Mr. Cooper is in the middle of a private business discussion," he began, but Tom cut him off. "No, sir, he's in the middle of a community emergency. And around here, that takes precedence over any business discussion." Tom turned to Michael. "Sarah called early this morning, told us everything, well, almost everything." He added with a knowing look that told Michael his secret about the disc was still safe. Behind Tom, the crowd of neighbors was already organizing themselves. Some headed toward the barn with tools and building materials, while others made their way to where Luna lay ill. Among them, Michael spotted Dr. Martinez returning with additional medical supplies and what looked like experimental treatments. "I've been consulting with colleagues across the state about Luna's condition," Dr. Martinez explained as she hurried past. "We think we might have something that could help." The Agritech representative cleared his throat. "Mr. Cooper, perhaps we should continue our conversation inside." "I think," came Sarah's voice from the porch, firm and clear, "that you gentlemen should come back another day. As you can see, we're rather busy right now." The corporate team exchanged glances, clearly unprepared for this level of community interference. After a moment's hesitation, they retreated to their vehicles, but not before their leader turned to Michael. "Our offer won't be available indefinitely, Mr. Cooper. Think carefully about what's at stake." As the black SUVs pulled away, Michael felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Emma, her eyes bright with excitement. "Dad, you need to see this. Everyone brought something. Food, supplies, everything we need. Mrs. Henderson even brought some of her special herbal remedies for Luna. She says they've been in her family for generations." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. The barn repair crew, led by several experienced local contractors who had volunteered their time and materials, worked efficiently to stabilize the dangerous areas and begin necessary repairs. Their expertise, combined with the community's willingness to help, accomplished in hours what would have taken weeks and thousands of dollars to do otherwise. Meanwhile, Dr. Martinez and a small team focused on Luna, administering a combination of conventional treatments and Mrs. Henderson's traditional remedies. The old woman had been reluctant at first to share her family's secrets, But Luna's condition had moved her to help. "These plants grow only in certain places," Mrs. Henderson explained as she prepared her mixture. "Places the old ones knew about. Places with power." She gave Michael a meaningful look that made him wonder just how much she might know about the land's secrets. By late afternoon, Luna's breathing had eased slightly, and she had even managed to stand for a short while. It wasn't a full recovery, but it was the first positive sign since she'd fallen ill. The community's presence had transformed more than just the immediate crisis. Women from the church had taken over the kitchen, preparing meals for the workers, and stocking the freezer with extras for the days ahead. The local feed store owner had arrived with a truck full of supplies, waving away Michael's attempts to discuss payment. "The invoice is marked paid," he said firmly. "Anonymous donor. And before you argue, remember that your family has helped. Plenty of others through tough times over the years. This is just the community's way of returning the favor." As sunset approached, Tom pulled Michael aside for a private conversation. "Listen, Mike, we know there's more going on here than just farm troubles. Those corporate types didn't show up just because of a failing barn." He held up a hand to stop Michael's response. "You don't have to tell me anything, but whatever it is, you don't have to face it alone." The words struck deep, reminding Michael of all the times the community had come together in the past. For barn raisings after natural disasters, during personal tragedies. This was more than just neighbors. Helping neighbors. It was a statement about the kind of place they all wanted to live in. Just then, Dr. Chen's car pulled up. She took in the scene with surprise. The dozens of people working, the partially repaired barn, the improved condition of the farm. Michael made the introductions, watching as she quickly adapted to the unexpected situation. "I have some important information to share with you," she said quietly to Michael. "But I can see this isn't the moment. Your community is doing something remarkable." "Here, they are," Michael agreed, looking around at the bustling activity. "And they've reminded me of something important. Whatever mysteries the disc holds, whatever its significance might be, it was found here for a reason. This land, these people, they're all connected somehow." As if to emphasize his words, Luna let out a stronger, clearer moo from the barn. The sound brought smiles to everyone's faces. Mrs. Henderson, still tending to the cow, nodded in satisfaction. "The land knows its own," she said cryptically, "and it protects its secrets until the right time." The sun was setting by the time the last of the volunteers began to leave, each promising to return the next day to continue the work. Michael stood with Sarah and Emma, watching their headlights wind down the driveway like a string of fireflies in the gathering dusk. "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" Emma asked, leaning against her father's shoulder. Michael pulled his family close, feeling for the first time in weeks that there might be a way forward. "Yes," he said. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. All of us." As the community's intervention had bought Michael some breathing space from his immediate crises, the mysteries surrounding the disc were about to take an unexpected turn. On a crystal-clear night exactly 1 week after the community's rally, Dr. Chen arrived at the farm with a discovery that would change everything. "I need you to see this," she said without preamble, her breath visible in the cold night air. She was carrying a large envelope and what looked like sophisticated surveying equipment. The excitement in her voice was palpable. "And we need to go to the exact spot where Luna found the disc." Michael glanced at Luna, who had made a remarkable recovery thanks to Mrs. Henderson's traditional remedies combined with Dr. Martinez's treatments. The cow was already standing at her usual spot in the north field, as if she had been expecting them. "Before we go out there," Michael said, "what did you mean in your message about the disc being part of something bigger?" Dr. Chen laid out a series of satellite maps on the hood of her car, illuminated by portable LED lights she had brought. "Look at these," she said, pointing to several marked locations across New England. Over the past century, there have been similar discoveries at each of these points. Golden artifacts, all with variations of the same symbolic language we found on your disc. She pulled out more documents, century-old newspaper clippings, archaeological reports, and hand-drawn maps. Most of these artifacts disappeared into private collections or were dismissed as hoaxes. But when you map their discovery locations, she connected the points with a marker, revealing a perfect geometric pattern. Your farm, she said, tapping the map, sits at what appears to be a crucial intersection point in this pattern. And there's more. She pulled out a star chart. The celestial alignment Dr. Suarez identified. It's not just about dating the artifact. These points on the ground mirror specific star configurations, but only during certain astronomical events. Michael studied the maps, his mind racing. Are you saying these artifacts were placed deliberately, as some kind of marker system? Exactly. But marking what? That's what we need to find out. She checked her watch. Tonight's conditions are perfect. Clear skies, and the stars are aligned. In a configuration that only happens once every few decades. If we're going to understand what this disk is trying to tell us, it needs to be now. They made their way to the north field, where Luna watched their approach with what Michael could have sworn was anticipation. Dr. Chen set up her equipment, a combination of astronomical instruments and what she explained was ground-penetrating radar. Mrs. Henderson's been telling me stories, Michael said as they worked. About the land having power, about certain places being special to the old ones. I always thought they were just local legends. But now, indigenous knowledge often contains profound truths, Dr. Chen replied, calibrating her instruments. Many archaeological discoveries have been guided by what Western science initially dismissed as mere folklore. As they finished setting up, something extraordinary began to happen. The night had grown unusually still, with not even a whisper of wind. Luna, who had moved closer, let out a soft moo that seemed to reverberate longer than it should have. Dr. Chen carefully removed the disc from its protective wrapping and placed it on a specially designed stand she had brought. As she aligned it, according to her calculations, Michael noticed something he had never seen before. Tiny points on the disc's surface were beginning to emit a faint bluish glow. That's impossible, Dr. Chen whispered, staring at the disc. The metallurgical analysis showed no phosphorescent properties. The glow intensified, and to their amazement, thin beams of light began to project from the disc's surface into the night air. The beams intersected and split, forming complex, geometric patterns that hung in the darkness like a holographic blueprint. Luna remained perfectly still, her white coat seeming to reflect the ethereal light. Around them, the air had taken on a strange quality, as if it had become somehow thicker, more substantial. The radar, Dr. Chen said suddenly, rushing to check her equipment. These readings. There's something beneath us. Something big. The ground-penetrating radar's display showed a complex network of structures or chambers deep below the surface. The pattern matched perfectly with the geometric design now floating in the air above the disk. It's a map, Michael realized, not just of the stars, but of what's underground. The disk isn't just an artifact, it's a key. As if in response to his words, the glowing patterns shifted, and new symbols began to appear in the air. Dr. Chen frantically photographed and recorded everything, while Michael noticed something else, familiar marks in the floating symbols that matched the strange writing in Mrs. Henderson's family grimoire, which she had shown him while treating Luna. These aren't just random locations, Dr. Chen said, her voice filled with awe. Your farm, all the other sites, they're placed along what appear to be ancient energy lines, the kind of things dowsers, and ancient cultures have talked about for centuries, but that modern science has never been able to verify. The implications were staggering. Not only had ancient peoples possessed knowledge and technology that shouldn't have been possible for their time, but they had created a vast network of connected sites for some purpose they were only beginning to understand. Luna moved forward, approaching the floating light display without fear. As she passed through one of the beams, the patterns shifted again, revealing new layers of information. It was as if she was somehow interacting with the energy field the disk had created. "That's why she found it," Michael said softly. "Why she's been drawn to this spot. She can sense whatever energy is flowing through here." Dr. Chen nodded, her scientific skepticism warring with the evidence before her eyes. Animals often perceive things we can't. The illness she experienced, it might have been a reaction to these energy fields growing stronger as we approach. The major alignment. The display suddenly flickered, and new symbols appeared, these ones clearly representing dates and astronomical positions. Dr. Chen gasped as she interpreted them. "This isn't just showing us what's below," she said. "It's showing us when. The spring equinox alignment isn't just about observing. Something is supposed to happen, something big." As if to confirm her words, the ground beneath them trembled slightly. Not enough to be frightening, but enough to let them know that whatever lay beneath their feet was far from dormant. Luna remained calm through it all, as if she had been waiting for this moment since the day she found the disk. She turned her large eyes toward Michael, and in that moment he felt certain that there was far more to his favorite cow than he had ever imagined. The light show lasted for exactly 12 minutes before gradually fading away, leaving them in darkness that seemed deeper than before. But the disk had changed. New symbols had appeared on its surface, visible even in normal light. "We need to move quickly," Dr. Chen said, already packing up her equipment. "Whatever is down there, whatever this is all leading to, we're not the only ones who know about it. Those men from Agritech, I've been doing some research. They're not just a corporate farming operation. They've been buying up properties at every one of these intersection points across New England." Michael thought about the aggressive way they had tried to acquire his farm, about their knowledge of the disk. "You think they know what's down there?" "I think they know something. And I think we're in a race to understand this disk's message before they find a way to claim this land and whatever secrets it's protecting." The morning after the disk's extraordinary light show, Michael's farmhouse kitchen had been transformed into an impromptu research center. Dr. Chen had worked through the night, coordinating with her colleagues via video calls while processing the massive amount of data they'd collected. Emma, unable to sleep after witnessing the previous night's events, had appointed herself research assistant, meticulously organizing photographs and notes. "Look at this," Dr. Chen said, spreading out a series of enhanced images she'd taken of the light patterns. "The symbols aren't just showing us the underground structures, they're telling a story, a history that predates everything we thought we knew about this region." Sarah, who had remained skeptical throughout much of their investigation, found herself drawn into the discussion. She pointed to a recurring pattern in the photographs. "These markings, they look like the carvings on that old stone well behind the Henderson property." "Exactly," Dr. Chen exclaimed. "And that's not the only local connection. Mrs. Henderson's family grimoire, the mysterious illnesses that have affected animals over the generations, even the unusual fertility of certain fields in the area, they're all tied to whatever network of sites this disk is revealing." A knock at the door interrupted their discussion. It was Mrs. Henderson, carrying a worn, leather-bound book that looked ancient. "I thought it was time you saw this," she said, placing the book on the kitchen table. "My family has been keeping records for generations, waiting for signs, like what happened last night." The book contained detailed drawings of lights in the sky, maps of underground chambers, and descriptions of strange events that had occurred. On and around Michael's farm over the centuries, many of the symbols matched those on the disc perfectly. "We were chosen as watchers," Mrs. Henderson explained, her weathered fingers tracing the familiar patterns. "My ancestors knew these lands held power, knew that someday someone would find the key." She looked meaningfully at Luna, visible through the window in her usual spot in the north field. Dr. Chen was practically vibrating with excitement as she compared Mrs. Henderson's book with her scientific data. "This is extraordinary. Your family's records provide the context we've been missing. The disc isn't just a map or a key, it's part of an ancient warning system." "Warning about what?" Michael asked, though something in his gut told him he already knew. Before anyone could answer, Luna's distinctive mood drew their attention. The cow was staring intently at something in the distance. Through the kitchen window, they could see a line of black SUVs approaching the farm. "Agritech," Michael growled. "They're early." "No," Dr. Chen said, checking her instruments. "They're right on time. The energy readings from the underground structures are spiking. Whatever is down there, it's becoming active." Mrs. Henderson nodded grimly. "The old ones knew this time would come. They built the network to contain something that wakes with certain celestial alignments. The disk isn't just a map, it's instructions for maintaining the containment system." The implications hit Michael like a physical blow. His land, his family's heritage, wasn't just a farm. It was part of an ancient network designed to protect... What exactly? Dr. Chen's latest readings provided a chilling answer. These energy signatures, they're identical to patterns recorded at sites of unexplained phenomena throughout history, places where the boundary between our world and something else grows thin. Sarah, who had been quietly absorbing everything, suddenly spoke up. "The stories my grandmother used to tell, about lights in the hills, about animals acting strange, about people disappearing and returning changed. They weren't just stories, were they?" "No," Mrs. Henderson confirmed. "Every family that's lived here long enough has similar tales. We just learned not to speak of them too openly. But now, with the alignment approaching and the disc activated..." The sound of car doors slamming outside interrupted her. Through the window, they could see men in suits approaching the house, led by the same Agritech representative as before. But this time, they were accompanied by others, people carrying scientific equipment that looked far more advanced than anything Dr. Chen had. "They're not just trying to buy the farm," Dr. Chen realized. "They want to access whatever is contained beneath it, and based on these readings, we're running out of time to stop them." Luna's moo sounded again, more urgent this time. To everyone's amazement, the cow began walking with purpose toward the old barn, stopping to look back at them as if expecting them to follow. "All these months," Michael said slowly, "she hasn't just been standing guard over the discovery site. She's been trying to show us something else." Without hesitation, the group quickly exited through the kitchen's back door, following Luna toward the barn. The structure, partially repaired thanks to the community's help, held its own secrets. Mrs. Henderson's expression showed recognition as they approached a specific section of the old foundation. "Here," she said, pointing to what appeared to be ordinary stones. "My grandmother once told me that when the time came, the way would be revealed." As if on cue, Luna pressed her nose against one of the stones. To everyone's amazement, faint lines of light began to appear between the rocks, forming a pattern that matched one of the disc's central designs. Michael heard the front door of his house being knocked on forcefully. They were out of time for hesitation. Taking out the disc, he held it up to the pattern on the barn wall. The response was immediate. The stones began to shift, revealing a passage that had remained hidden for generations. The barn wasn't just built here by chance, Dr. Chen whispered, her scientific mind struggling to process what she was seeing. It was constructed specifically to hide this entrance. The sound of voices getting closer forced their hand. One by one, they ducked into the passage, Luna watching calmly as they entered. Just as Michael, the last one in, cleared the entrance, the stones shifted back into place, leaving no trace of their escape. They found themselves in a tunnel that seemed to glow with a faint bluish light, similar to what the disc had produced. The walls were covered in familiar symbols, telling a story they were only beginning to understand. "Now," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice echoing slightly in the ancient passage, "it's time you learned the full truth about your land, Michael Cooper. The truth that every Guardian family has passed down through generations, waiting for this moment." The underground passage led them deeper into the earth, its walls pulsing with that strange bluish light that seemed to respond to their presence. Dr. Chen's instruments were going haywire, recording energy readings that defied conventional scientific understanding. Above them, they could hear the muffled sounds of agritech personnel searching the property. "All these years," Michael said, running his hand along the glowing symbols that matched those on the disc. "My family was doing more than just farming. We were protecting something without even knowing it. Not without knowing," Mrs. Henderson corrected. "Some knew. They just understood the importance of keeping certain knowledge hidden until the right time." She stopped at a junction in the tunnel, consulting her family's book. "Your grandfather, Michael, he knew more than he let on. Why do you think he made you promise never to sell the land?" The passage opened into a vast chamber that took their breath away. The ceiling soared overhead, covered in the same symbols they'd seen on the disc, all glowing with that otherworldly blue light. But it was what stood in the center of the chamber that made them stop in their tracks. A massive circular platform dominated the space, its surface etched with concentric rings that matched the pattern on the disc exactly. At regular intervals, around the platform stood what appeared to be crystalline pillars, each thrumming with energy that made the air itself feel charged. "It's a containment system," Dr. Chen breathed, her scientific skepticism finally giving way to wonder. "The disc isn't just a key, it's a control mechanism, and these pillars—" She consulted her readings. "They're generating some kind of energy field that extends far beyond this chamber." Above them, the sound of heavy machinery could be heard. Agritech was bringing in serious equipment, perhaps already aware of what lay beneath the farm. "They're going to try to break through," Sarah said, worry evident in her voice. "They have the resources to dig up the entire property if they have to." "Let them try," Mrs. Henderson said with surprising confidence. "The old ones built these chambers to last, but we don't have much time. The alignment is nearly upon us, and the system needs to be reinforced before then." Dr. Chen's equipment suddenly emitted a series of urgent beeps. "These energy readings, they're building toward something. Whatever is contained here is responding to the approaching celestial alignment." As if in response to her words, the chamber's light pulsed more intensely. The disc in Michael's hands grew warm, its symbols now glowing with the same blue luminescence as the chamber. "Mrs. Henderson," Michael said, an idea forming, "you said your family were watchers. That means there must be others, right? Other families protecting other sites?" The old woman's eyes lit up with understanding. "Yes, scattered across New England. Many have forgotten their purpose, but the connections remain." "Why?" "Because we're not just facing agritech here," Michael said. "If they're really buying up all the connection points in the network, then other Guardian families must be facing the same pressure. We need to warn them, unite them." Sarah pulled out her phone. "The community network we built during the barn. Crisis. We can use it. Rural families talk to each other, especially when corporations start buying up land. We can spread the word." "But will they believe us?" Emma asked, gesturing at their supernatural surroundings. A deep rumble shook the chamber, and one of the crystalline pillars flickered momentarily. Above them, the sound of drilling could be heard. "They don't need to believe everything," Michael said. "They just need to hold on to their land until the alignment passes. Buy us time to understand how to reinforce the containment system." Dr. Chen, who had been studying the platform intently, called them over. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a series of indentations in the platform's rings. "They match the disc exactly. I think the disc needs to be placed here during the alignment. Not just to reinforce the containment, but to recharge it somehow." Another rumble shook the chamber, stronger this time. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the blue light flickered ominously. "But the alignment is still days away," Sarah protested. "How do we hold off agritech for that long?" The answer came in an unexpected form. Luna's distinctive moo echoed through the chamber, but different somehow, deeper, more resonant. The sound seemed to interact with the energy field, causing the blue light to pulse in response. Mrs. Henderson's eyes widened. "Of course," she whispered. "The animals always knew. They could sense the energy, interact with it. Why do you think the old families were all farmers? The livestock helped maintain the field naturally, strengthening it through their presence." Michael looked at Luna with newfound understanding. "She didn't just find the disc by accident. She's been part of the protection system all along, in her own way." Dr. Chen's instruments suddenly lit up with new readings. The energy field, it's stabilizing. The animals above, all the livestock on the surrounding farms. They're somehow contributing to the containment system's strength. Sarah was already on her phone, sending messages through the community network. Within minutes, responses started pouring in, reports of similar corporate buyout attempts across the region, of strange lights and unexplained phenomena, of family, legends, suddenly taking on new meaning. "The Henderson farm isn't the only one with an old grimoire," Mrs. Henderson said, reading the incoming messages over Sarah's shoulder. "Other families are finding their own records, their own pieces of the puzzle." Above them, the drilling stopped. Instead, they heard vehicles, many vehicles, arriving at the farm. But these weren't the sleek SUVs of agritech. Through Dr. Chen's remote camera feed, they watched as truck after truck arrived, filled with farmers and their livestock, creating a barrier between agritech's equipment and the activation site. "The community's buying us time," Michael said, pride evident in his voice. "Now we need to make it count." Over the next several days, as the alignment drew closer, a remarkable scene played out above ground. The corporate teams found themselves stalled by an impromptu farmers' market that sprang up on Michael's land. Hundreds of local families arrived with their animals, setting up stalls and activities that just happened to block any attempt at drilling or surveying. Meanwhile, below ground, Dr. Chen and Mrs. Henderson worked tirelessly to decipher the chamber's instructions. The disc symbols, combined with the grimoire's records, revealed a complex series of steps needed to reinforce the containment field during the alignment. Finally, the crucial moment arrived. As the stars moved into their precise positions, Michael stood at the central platform, the disc ready to be placed. Around him, the crystalline pillars pulsed with increasing intensity. Above ground, Luna and hundreds of other animals added, their voices to a chorus that seemed to shake the very earth. "Now, Michael," Dr. Chen called out, checking her instruments. "The alignment is perfect." Michael placed the disc into the central indentation. The effect was immediate and extraordinary. Blue light erupted from the platform, traveling up through the pillars and out into the network of tunnels. The chamber filled with a harmonic resonance that touched something deep in their souls. Above ground, agritech's equipment suddenly failed, their instruments overwhelmed by energy they couldn't understand. The ancient containment system, recharged and reinforced, sent out a pulse that traveled through all the connected sites, strengthening the boundaries it had been built to maintain. When it was over, when the light faded and the resonance died away, they knew something fundamental had changed. The disk had transformed, its symbols now permanently luminescent, a lasting reminder of its true purpose. In the days that followed, Michael's farm became something more than just a family legacy. It became a gathering point for other guardian families, a place where ancient knowledge could be shared and preserved. The community that had come together to save his farm now extended across the region, united in protecting something far older and more important than any corporate interest. Luna, her role in the great mystery finally understood, took up her position as more than just a curious cow. She became a symbol of the connection between the guardians and the land they protected, a reminder that wisdom sometimes comes in unexpected forms. Agritech eventually withdrew their offers, their corporate machines no match for the combined strength of rural communities, armed with ancient knowledge and modern determination. The containment network, hidden for centuries, had found its new guardians. As for Michael, he finally understood that his family's true wealth had never been in the farm's financial success, but in their role as protectors of something far more precious. The disc, now secured in its chamber below the barn, would remain a secret passed down through generations, along with the knowledge of what really lies beneath the peaceful fields of New England. "You know," he said to Luna one evening as they stood watching the sunset from the north field, "some mysteries are meant to be protected, not solved." The cow turned her wise eyes toward him and mooed softly in agreement, as the ancient energies hummed quietly beneath their feet, safely contained for another generation, for another